All right, Joes, real quick before we dive in, just a little housekeeping. I'm officially on vacation from the day job, which means I'm doing what every responsible adult does with time off. I'm hoarding podcast episodes like it's the apocalypse. The goal here is simple. I want to get episodes recorded and edited far enough ahead that this show never misses a drop. No delays, no scramble, no, hey, sorry, life happened posts. Monday means always a mainline Monday episode drop. Thursday means always a Thursday Checkpoint Extra drop. Every single time. Consistency is the play here. And along those same lines, the Average Joe Nerdcast is launching on YouTube in the coming days. It'll be the same episodes you already get wherever you're choosing to listen to this podcast from. Just another place to hang out, comment, and keep the lobby open. If that's your preferred platform, I've got you covered. All right, that's the boring responsible adult update. Let's dive into that episode. There was a stretch of time where E3 wasn't just an event. It was the moment. 1 week a year where the entire gaming industry hit pause and everybody, fans, the press, publishers, all looked in the same exact direction. Not scattered, not algorithm fed, not drip fed over 6 months, all at once. If you were online in the late 90s or 2000s, you remember it. Because during E3 week, websites crashed, forums exploded, school productivity dropped to zero, and every group chat turned into, "Dude, did you see that?" This was not just a trade show. This was Gaming Super Bowl. Hey, and welcome back to another Checkpoint Extra edition of the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your resident Average Joe, nostalgia archaeologist, and the guy who still reflexively checks his phone every June like, all right, what's Microsoft doing? And if you're new to Checkpoint Extras, these are our side missions, the lore drops, the deep cuts, the connective tissue between the big mainline Monday episodes. And today's episode is very much a companion piece to our G4 deep dive. Because if G4 was the death of gaming television, then E3 is the death of centralized gaming hype. And they died for the same exact reason. The internet did not hate them. It just replaced them. So let's get this out of the way early because people love to fight ghosts online. E3 did not die because gaming got boring, publishers got lazy, and fans don't care anymore. Gaming is so much bigger than it has ever been. E3 died because the industry no longer needed a single stage, a single week, or a single permission slip to speak. And once that reality set in, there was no version of E3 that could survive it. Sound familiar? It sure does. Because it's the same story as G4 TV, just a different venue. E3 wasn't created for us. Not originally. It was founded in 1995 by the Entertainment Software Association because game companies were sick of being treated like toys at CES. They wanted legitimacy, press respect, retailer attention, an industry seat at the table. E3 was a trade show first, a business meeting dressed up like a spectacle. Retailers went to place orders, the press went to write previews, and publishers went to flex. But gamers? We were the audience at home, watching through magazine scans, grainy streams, and later, G4 TV broadcasts. It was gate-kept hype, and for a long time, that gatekeeping worked. E3 was the hype machine before hype was a job. And here's what younger listeners might not fully grasp. E3 created anticipation. You didn't know what was coming. You didn't get leaks 6 months early. You didn't get trailers on a drip feed. You waited. And when that curtain lifted, it hit like a truck. Because E3 was not about one game, it was about moments. So let's run through a few that defined entire generations. How about we start with Final Fantasy VII? Because this one is impossible to overstate. Before Final Fantasy VII, JRPGs were niche. They existed, sure, but mostly for people already deep in the weeds. And then Square walks onto the E3 stage and shows full 3D characters, cinematic cutscenes, pre-rendered backgrounds, and suddenly this genre that used to feel inside baseball looked like the future of gaming. This was not just a game reveal, it was a statement. It told the whole world this medium can do scale, it can do emotion, and it absolutely can do spectacle. Final Fantasy VII didn't just sell the original PlayStation, it changed how Western audiences looked at RPGs going forward. That moment alone reshaped the industry. Then there's Metal Gear Solid 2, which might be one of the most infamous E3 reveals of all time. Kojima comes out and shows gameplay that looks impossible for the era. Rain effects, crowd simulations, cinematic camera work, a level of polish that made people question reality. And at E3, everyone thought the same thing. This is the next evolution of video games. What nobody knew yet was that Kojima was not just flexing tech. He was setting up one of the biggest bait and switches in gaming history. But at the time, that reveal hit like a freight train. It proved games could be cinema, and then weaponized that expectation. Classic Kojima. And the original Xbox, it did not have nostalgia. It didn't have legacy franchises. It didn't have goodwill. And then Halo appears, and suddenly, this weird new console has an identity all its own. Smooth controls, vehicular combat, massive open levels, a science fiction world that felt serious and mythic. That E3 showing did not just sell a game, it told people, okay, Microsoft might actually belong here. Without Halo landing the way it did at E3, the Xbox story looks so much different. And this might be the coldest moment in all of E3 history. And it only works because of what Sega did right before it. Sega takes the stage. They announce that the Saturn is already out in North America. No waiting, no scheduled fall launch. You can buy one today. And then they drop the price. $399. It's bold, it's aggressive. It feels like Sega saying, we're early, we're premium, and we're confident. Then Sony walks out, and this is where E3 turns into an execution. One Sony executive, Steve Race, walks to the microphone, no slides, no trailer, no music cue. He looks out at the crowd and says one number, $299, and he walks off the stage. That's it. In one sentence, Sony didn't just undercut Sega's price, they undercut the value proposition of an early launch. And suddenly, the Sega Saturn was not bold. It was too expensive. That moment didn't just win Sony the show, it set the tone for the entire PlayStation era. And you can draw a straight line from that mic drop moment to Sega exiting the hardware business just a few years later. E3 used to be that brutal. Or how about when Nintendo revealed the Wii? A lot of people at the time didn't get it. The name sounded weird. The controller looked like a television remote. The games were not flexing raw power. And the room response? A little confused. But E3 audiences started realizing something very quickly. Nintendo was not competing on specs. They were competing on accessibility. Motion controls, family appeal, games your parents could understand. And within a few years, the Wii had detonated the entire industry. That E3 reveal was the quiet beginning of one of the most successful consoles ever made. Or how about the first Mass Effect demo shown at E3? It didn't look flashy in the traditional sense. What it did was introduce an idea: dialogue wheels, moral choices, branching consequences. People watching realized, oh shit, this isn't just story dressing, this is systems level choice. That demo didn't scream, it sank in. And suddenly, RPGs weren't just about stats and combat anymore. They were about identity. That E3 showing built trust, and trust carried that franchise for years. And you know, Bethesda walking out Skyrim at E3 is almost funny in hindsight. Because by then, people already knew what Skyrim was. But every single time they showed it, it worked. Big open world, dragons, mods, that damn theme music. E3 audiences were not surprised. They were reassured. Yes, this will eat your life again. And sometimes, that is exactly what a reveal needs to do. And then there's Sony's E3 2013 presentation. Now, this one deserves its own episode of a Checkpoint Extra entirely. Xbox had just spent weeks taking heat. DRM confusion, always online messaging, anti-consumer vibes everywhere. Sony didn't yell, they didn't dunk loudly. They just explained how used video games would work, then showed games, then walked off the stage. That moment was not just a win. It defined an entire console generation. People still reference it because it felt like a crowdsourced victory. E3 used to create moments just like that. They were events, moments where the industry collectively gasped. And you know, E3 worked because of its theater. The lights, the crowd, the applause, the awkward live demos, the occasional on-stage disaster. You could feel the pressure. Developers sweating through demos, CEOs trying to sound cool, journalists racing to file stories. That tension, it absolutely mattered. Because when something landed, it really landed. And when it didn't, oh dude, it lived forever. And E3 announcements felt bigger because you did not get do-overs. You had one shot, one stage, one room full of press, fans, and the competition, and 1 week where everyone was paying attention to you. If you blew it, you didn't patch the trailer. You didn't drop a second cut. You didn't say, wait till next month. You waited a full year. That pressure changed everything. Developers rehearsed like it was opening night. Executives aged 5 years in a single press conference. Live demos ran the risk of completely imploding, and sometimes they absolutely did. And that risk, that's what made it electric, because scarcity makes attention valuable. And when attention is valuable, moments absolutely matter. And speaking of attention, the attention economy used to be brutal, because back then, attention was not infinite. There were fewer outlets, fewer streams, fewer voices. So when E3 happened, it owned the entire conversation. There was no, I'll catch the highlights later. This was the highlight. You were either in the moment or you were left behind, and nobody wanted to be left behind. Today, announcements are everywhere. If something doesn't hit, it gets reposted, re-edited, re-announced, reframed. Publishers can test reactions in real time. If hype dips, they adjust. And don't get me wrong, that's great for business, but terrible for myth making. Because nothing feels final. Nothing feels a little dangerous. Nothing feels like this has to work. And when you stood on that stage, you committed to a release window, to a vision, to expectations. And the audience remembered. That's why broken promises hurt more back then. That's why overpromising became legend. And that's why under-delivering stuck, because there was no noise to hide in. And E3 didn't just show games, it created events. Moments you argued about, moments you defended, moments you still reference decades later. Because you did not see them alone on a timeline. You saw them together at the same time, on the same stage, with the same stakes. And once you lose that scarcity, you lose the gravity. And E3 didn't just reveal games, it decided whole futures. This was the place where consoles proved they belonged. Studios earned trust, or completely lost it. Franchises either came back to life or flatlined in front of everyone. When you showed up at E3, you weren't just announcing something, you were staking a claim. This was publishers planting flags in the ground and saying, "This is who we are now." And once you said that on stage, you could never take it back. There are developers and creatives whose entire careers pivoted because of one E3 demo that landed. A strong showing could mean bigger budgets, sequel greenlights, and industry respect. But a weak one? That could be the beginning of the end. Because E3 didn't just get watched by fans, it got watched by investors, executives, competitors, and the entire press ecosystem. If your game hit, opportunities followed. But if it didn't, the questions started immediately. This is where dormant franchises got their resurrections. Risky reboots were judged instantly. New IPs either caught fire or vanished entirely. Sometimes E3 saved a franchise. Sometimes it exposed that the magic was truly gone, and that judgment happened live. There were no soft launches, no wait for the patch, no controlled messaging, just reaction. And that's the part people forget. E3 was not neutral. It wasn't a polite exhibition. It was competitive theater. Microsoft watching Sony, Sony watching Nintendo, publishers timing announcements to steal thunder from the competition. Every press conference was a flex. Every reveal was a challenge. Every applause break absolutely mattered. And because everyone was in the same building, that tension was real. That competition created rivalries, legendary wins, and infamous flops. Moments people to this day still argue about. Because when you put the entire industry on one stage, the drama is inevitable. And drama, like we all know, is always memorable. And here's the quiet truth that makes this part of the episode hurt just a little. That kind of pressure doesn't exist anymore. Because today, announcements are staggered, reactions are controlled, and fallout is diluted. Nobody risks everything on one singular moment, which, don't get me wrong, makes sense. But it also means fewer legends get born. And here's the part that still hits. We didn't just watch E3, we planned our whole lives and schedules around it. We would skip class, we refreshed pages, we watched grainy streams, we waited for G4 recaps if our internet absolutely sucked. E3 was where a lot of us first felt like, oh shit, this hobby is bigger than just me. And that feeling, it sticks with you. And here's the thing about something that big, that loud, something that central to an entire industry. Once it stops being necessary, the fall is never dramatic. It's quiet. And that's exactly what happened to E3. In 2013, Nintendo did something that felt small at the time. They didn't walk on stage. They didn't hold a live press conference. They didn't deal with awkward applause pauses or tech demos going wrong in real time. They just dropped a video, a Nintendo Direct, pre-recorded, tightly edited, controlled, released on their terms. And it worked really, really well. Because for the first time, a major publisher proved something terrifying to E3. We don't actually need this show to reach our audience. Nintendo could speak directly to its fans, control the messaging, avoid leaks until they chose, and skip the cost and chaos of the convention center. No stage fright, no demos crashing, no journalists coughing during quiet moments. Just information, clean and deliberate. And the industry, it noticed. Nintendo Direct wasn't just a new format, it was a philosophical shift. Because E3 was built on a few assumptions. Publishers needed press needed access, retailers needed previews. Nintendo Direct quietly said, what if we skip all of that and just talk directly to the players? And once that question existed, there was no putting it back in the box. Other publishers watched this and went, oh, we could just do that too. And suddenly, Sony starts experimenting with their own showcases. Microsoft invests more in live streams. Publishers realize they can own their hype cycles. Why fight for attention during one crowded week in June when you could own an entire day in February or October or a random Tuesday morning? E3's biggest strength, everyone being in one place, was now its biggest liability. Now, this is the moment people don't really talk about enough. When Sony skipped E3, it was not loud. It wasn't dramatic. They didn't storm out. They just didn't show up. And that was huge because Sony was not a minor player. They were one of the core pillars. If Sony didn't need E3, then who really did? And from that point on, E3 started feeling optional. And optional is a death sentence for events like this. And this is where things begin to fracture. EA launches EA Play. Ubisoft does their own thing. Bethesda goes solo. Activision distance itself. Everyone wants their own spotlight, their own pacing, and the ability to control their own narrative. And E3 becomes less of a centerpiece and more of a calendar suggestion. So the Entertainment Software Association sees this happening and panics quietly. They try to pivot E3 into a fan event, an influencer space, a consumer show, still a trade show. And this is where the identity crisis really kicks in, because E3 no longer knows who it's for. Is it press? The fans? Influencers? The developers? Or retailers? The answer slowly becomes all of them, which in practice means none of them fully. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does, because it's the same exact problem G4 had. And letting fans in wasn't a bad idea, but it changed the math. Now E3 had to manage crowds, sell tickets, build spectacle, and justify the cost. While publishers ask, why are we paying millions to be here when we can just live stream for free? The economics stopped making sense. And once the money doesn't make sense, the magic evaporates fast. And here's the subtle part. E3 stopped feeling like a shared ritual instead of everyone is watching this together. Here's the subtle part. E3 stopped feeling like a shared ritual. Instead of everyone is watching this together, it became catch the highlights later. And that is a massive downgrade because hype is emotional. It feeds on reaction, on being there as it happens. And once E3 lost that, it was already bleeding out. So by the late 2010s, E3 was still happening, but the heart of it, that was already dead and gone. And then something happened that forced everyone to say the quiet part out loud. E3 disappeared. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. I mean literally. COVID hit. Travel shut down. Conventions collapsed overnight. And in 2020, E3 was canceled. No show floor, no stage reveals, no week-long hype cycle. Just nothing. And here's the moment where the story really takes a turn. Because the industry did not scramble. It just adapted. Almost immediately. Instead of chaos, we got digital showcases, publisher live streams, surprise trailers, tightly controlled announcements. Summer still happened, announcements still happened, games still got revealed. And that's when the uncomfortable realization started creeping in. E3 was not being paused, it was being replaced in real time. And this is the part nobody likes to admit out loud. When E3 didn't happen in 2020, the industry didn't feel smaller. If anything, it felt more flexible. Publishers realized they didn't need to book space, they didn't need to fly staff, they didn't need to compete for headlines. They could control the pacing, choose timing, and target specific audiences. And for a business, that is incredibly attractive because E3 was always a gamble. You spent millions of dollars and hoped you won the week. Digital showcases removed all the risk. And here's the emotional contradiction. The new system worked logistically, but it didn't feel the same. Because reactions were fragmented, the hype was staggered, and there was no single moment. You didn't have, dude, did you see that live? You just had, oh, yeah, I saw that. It dropped earlier today. Efficient, clean, and emotionally hollow. But efficiency wins in business every single time. And E3 tried to adapt. Digital-only versions, partnered streams, virtual booths, online schedules. But here's the glaring problem. E3's value was never the videos. It was the physical convergence, the chaos, the noise, the shared exhaustion, the sense that everything was happening all at once. And once that disappeared, E3 was just another stream in a sea of streams. And that is a brutal downgrade for a brand built on spectacle. So by 2021 and 2022, something became clear. Publishers were not asking, so when is E3 coming back? They were asking, do we even want it to? Because now they had established pipelines, reliable audiences, and direct feedback loops. E3 was not a necessity anymore. It was a nostalgic preference. And nostalgia, it doesn't sign contracts. And this is where the G4 TV comparison really starts to lock in. G4 lost relevance when creators could speak directly to audiences. Cable became unnecessary, and the middle layer vanished. E3 lost relevance when publishers could speak directly to its fans, press stopped being gatekeepers, and centralized hype was no longer required. Same collapse, different industry layer. And once the middle layer is gone, it does not come back. And here's the scariest part of the whole thing. When E3 announced digital-only plans, the reaction wasn't outrage. It wasn't panic. It was kind of indifference. That's when you know something is truly in trouble. Because anger means people still give a shit. Silence means they've already moved on. So by the time E3 tried to return, the world it was built for was already long gone. So after the pandemic years, E3 tried to come back. And this is where the story gets a little uncomfortable, because on paper, the comeback attempts looked reasonable. Rebrands, new leadership, promises of creator inclusion, fan-first experiences, and digital native thinking. The pitch was essentially, okay, we hear you, this time it'll be different. But here's the problem. E3 was not broken in a way you could fix with better messaging. It was obsolete in a way you could not pitch your way out of. For decades, E3 was run by the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, which is important context, because the ESA did not exist to throw parties. It existed to lobby, protect industry interests, and manage trade relationships. E3 was always a business-first event, even when it felt like a gamer holiday. And when the cracks started showing, the ESA didn't pivot fast enough, because structurally, it really couldn't. By the time they realized we need creators, we need fans, we need energy again, Those audiences had already found homes elsewhere, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Discord, on Twitter, and through independent showcases. The party had moved. E3 showed up late. E3 was officially canceled in 2023. And this time, there was no confusion. No, well, maybe next year kind of energy. There was no outrage. Just a collective shrug. Publishers had already committed elsewhere. Media outlets had restructured coverage. Fans had already adjusted expectations. E3 was not missed. And that's the most brutal sentence you can say about something that once ruled an entire industry. When the ESA formally announced the end of E3, the language was corporate and calm. There was no drama, no spectacle, no farewell show. Just an acknowledgement that the model no longer worked. The costs outweighed the benefits, and the industry had well and truly changed. And that was it. After nearly 30 years, E3 ended not with applause, but with a press release. And here's the hard truth. There was no version of E3 that could exist in the modern landscape without fundamentally becoming something else. To survive, it would have needed to abandon exclusivity, give up control, decentralize hype, compete with free platforms. And once you do that, you're not really E3 anymore. You're just another event trying to be noticed. E3's strength was always its monopoly on attention. And once that monopoly broke, the brand had nothing left to leverage. So let's talk about what replaced E3, because technically we have more announcements now than ever before. Summer Game Fest, Nintendo Directs, PlayStation showcases, Xbox events, publisher-specific streams, surprise drops, shadow announcements, the Game Awards. Content-wise, we're fucking drowning. But emotionally, something's kind of missing. Because hype is no longer communal. It's segmented, algorithm-fed, time-shifted. You don't experience it together like we used to. You experience it alone or in small bubbles. E3 was flawed, sure, but it was shared. And people don't miss E3 because it was perfect. They miss it because it gave the industry a rhythm, a calendar anchor, a shared language. E3 season, it meant something. It usually meant speculation, leaks, rumors, late nights, group chats blowing up. Now, announcements just kinda happen, and they're forgotten just as fast. G4 and E3 died for the same reason. Not because they were bad, but because they were middlemen in a world that stopped needing the middlemen. Once creators and publishers could go direct, once audiences could choose their own feeds, the centralized stage, it lost its power. The gate was gone, and when the gate disappears, so does the gatekeepers. So when you ask what did E3 actually leave behind, I gotta say legacy. Moments, memories, reveals that still get referenced to this day. E3 didn't just show games, it shaped how we talked about games. And you know, that matters, even if the format could not survive. E3 was not murdered. It wasn't sabotaged. It wasn't ruined by one decision or another. It just aged out of relevance. Quietly, inevitably, logically. And for a while, a good long while, it was magic. Not because of that stage, but because we were all watching it together. And sometimes, that's enough. All right, before we close this one out, I want to hear from you. Because if you lived through the E3 era, you know it wasn't just a trade show, it was a whole season. So here's my question to you. What was your favorite E3 moment? Not your favorite game ever, your favorite E3 moment. Maybe it was staying up way too late watching a press conference on a janky stream, or refreshing IGN every 5 seconds during your class, or watching G4 recap everything because you didn't have good internet at the time, or that one reveal that made your brain short circuit in real time. And here's my follow-up, because this one does matter. Do you actually miss E3? Or do you just miss how it made gaming feel back then? Drop your answers to me in the comments, or shoot me a DM, or drop them on the socials, wherever you interact with the show. Hell, send a carrier pigeon, or a message in a bottle. And if we get enough responses, maybe I'll do a follow-up Checkpoint Extra reading through the E3 and G4 memories like a digital scrapbook. Because you know what, guys? Those moments still matter, even if that stage is gone. So yeah, that's the life and death of E3. Not a tragedy, not a scandal. Just the natural end of something built for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. E3 was not perfect. It was not always consumer friendly, and it definitely was not cheap. But for a long time, it gave the entire gaming industry a shared moment, a single stage, a single week, a collective breath held together. And once all of that disappeared, everything became quieter, more efficient, more fragmented, better in some ways, worse in others. E3 didn't die because games stopped being exciting. It died because excitement no longer needed permission. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different. If you enjoyed this Checkpoint Extra, follow the show wherever you listen. Drop a rating if the app lets you, and send this episode to someone who still remembers E3 week like it was a holiday. Because the algorithm is powerful, but nostalgia, it spreads faster. All right, before we power down, I gotta give some love where it's due. First and always, shout out to my player 2. Thank you for riding with me while I disappear into the mental archives of gaming history and say things like, no, seriously, E3 2004 was different, with my entire chest. Your patience is unmatched. Your support is constant, and I appreciate you more than I probably say out loud. Shout out to Cap. Brother, you might not have lived through peak E3 press conference chaos in real time, but I know for a fact you would have been texting me mid-conference like, wait, dude, fuck, did you see that? Shout out always to my brother Ian, holding down the fort. Thanks for keeping me grounded, keeping me sane, and reminding me that touching grass occasionally is still important, even during E3 season. And of course, shout out to Pickle. Pickle does not understand what E3 was. Pickle does not understand why I'm explaining it. Pickle is, however, now fully aware that once upon a time, games were announced on a stage and not just dropped randomly on a Tuesday. He is unimpressed, as he should be. And to all of you, the listeners, whether you were refreshing IGN in the middle of class that you should have been paying attention to, or watching grainy streams at midnight, or catching the recaps on G4 because your internet could not hang, thanks for being here. Thanks for caring about this stuff, and thanks for keeping these memories alive. The lobby is always open, and don't forget, stay gold, nerd bold, and I'll catch you at the next checkpoint.
Game over.